Welcome into episode 205 of the Skate Podcast. I'm Brian DeFelice, joined by Bridgette and Scott McLaughlin. Bridgette and Scott, the Bruins have been in the news the last few days, locally and league-wide. Obviously, the NHL Awards were in Vegas, and there were a few Bruins bringing home some hardware there. We'll get into
Nashville.
that.
They were in Nashville.
Oh, yeah, that's true, Nashville. I don't know
it's like Vegas, but like a little bit more southern.
Weren't they always in Vegas before? Like every year they were always in Vegas? Or do they always move around?
I feel like they were in LA before.
They were in Vegas one year, but I think it generally moves around.
Yeah.
Well, they were in Nashville. But regardless, the biggest news is Taylor Hall is no longer a Boston Bruin. He goes to the Chicago Blackhawks in essentially a salary dump. Nick Foligno, Chicago got the rights to him as well as a UFA, and they signed him to a 1-year, $4 million contract. The Bruins got a few minor leaguers in return, and they also made another move. So, guys, the Bruins, the wheels are in motion already this offseason. Things have to happen quick for them because it's going to be a busy offseason for them, and it's already starting.
Yeah, we knew there had to be salary dumped somewhere, possibly multiple players. I still think there's going to be more. You know, you still get that log jam on the left side of the defense, and you figure one of Grzelcyk, Forbort, or Riley, at least one of them, is moving in some fashion, whether it's a trade or, you know, the buyout window is still open till the end of the month. You have to think something's going to happen there. But we also thought, you know, one of the bigger contracts, and we highlighted all along, you know, probably either Taylor Hall or Linus Ullmark or both, was going to be gone, and it ends up being Taylor Hall to start. We'll see what comes next. But yeah, like you said, it was essentially a pure salary dump. You do get the rights, the restricted free agent rights to two younger defensemen, Ian Mitchell and Alec Regula. Ian Mitchell has actually played like 82 NHL games, so there's some experience there. He doesn't exactly have a great track record in Chicago. He was sort of one of the bottom of the roster guys on a really bad team. But maybe there's something there. He played for Jim Montgomery at Denver, so obviously a player that he's familiar with. And Regula's 22. He's a big guy. I think he's 6'4". So, you know, see how he develops in Providence and maybe have something. So it's not like they didn't get anything, but for the most part, it was, you know, it was all about moving that salary out. And that's, they didn't have to give up anything else, you know, didn't have to give up any picks or prospects to do it, which if you're moving someone like a Forbort or Riley, you might have to. So that's $6 million off the book. I think now the Bruins are a little under $11 million in terms of cap space, which is, you know, still, when you look at how many roster positions they need to fill, now they're down to 6 forwards signed to NHL contracts. $11 million runs out really quickly, so you got to figure there's still more moves coming, especially if they want to re-sign Tyler Bertuzzi, which certainly seems to be a priority and seems like the logical next step after getting rid of Hall.
Yeah, it kind of felt like you would almost need to already know that Bertuzzi was interested to come back and in order to make this decision, right? Because just like you said, you don't have all that many forwards under contract, so you kind of have to know what other forwards you're gonna have back before you trade away a Taylor Hall. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I do want to say I like Taylor Hall as a player. I don't think the decision was really based on like his performance. I thought he had a good playoff run. I hear people like all of a sudden having some sort of revisionist history about how Taylor Hall like didn't help the team at all. But if anybody recalls, he was one of the better players in the playoffs. And also a lot of revisionist history that, I mean, Bertuzzi had a good playoffs too. They both did. But kind of letting Bertuzzi off the hook for some of the dumb passes and different things that I personally think if he doesn't make a few of them, they might win that series. But anyhow, Bertuzzi seems to be the most obvious choice for where that money could go now, because we know they do want to keep him around if they can. We're not sure what the price is yet, though. But Don Sweeney must have a decent gauge on it, I think. But also, you couldn't trade Ullmark on the day of the NHL Awards where he's going up for a Vezina. Like, the optics of that would be so strange. And Don Sweeney's sitting there right with, like, in the front row with Montgomery and his wife. And, yeah, it would have been weird. And Scott and I were talking about this before, but like there was a little bit of awkwardness in Ullmark's speech at the awards because he mentioned that coaching staff butted heads about like the goalies. But he was like, but we were all friends at the end of the day. And it was kind of like, okay, well, we didn't know any of that like behind the scenes was going on, that there was like butting heads. And I wonder how much of that he's talking about in the playoffs or what. Also, we can talk about some of the other things he said, but I mostly just bring up his comments because he could easily be on the way out too. We've heard more recently that they want to keep both goalies, but do you think that this gives them enough leeway cap-wise to not have to make another big salary dump with Ullmark?
Well, I wouldn't view – well, so I understand why I understand the question. Moving Ullmark wouldn't be a strict salary dump. That would be a hockey trade.
I mean, you'd be also wanting to get picks and stuff back, but is it necessary is maybe the way I should frame it.
I think it is. I think this team needs to – well, so first of all, on the Taylor Hall aspect of it, yeah, it's one of those situations where they better re-sign Bertuzzi, because if you don't, well, look, so the situation the Bruins are in, like they're up against the cap no matter what. And after last playoffs collapse and choke job, I like from personally, nobody's job outside of a couple of guys should be safe. And if the Bruins want to shake things up, they reserve that right. So if they don't sign Bertuzzi and they essentially let Taylor Hall go for salary relief, you know what? Like, fine. I mean, it's not ideal if you want to try to stay competitive, but so yeah, so that's like the caveat to dumping Taylor Hall's salary to Chicago is that yes, you should re-sign Bertuzzi, or else it's kind of like, well, okay, you got rid of some cap, but he's a good player though, so hopefully they can get Bertuzzi. I like Bertuzzi. I would rather Bertuzzi over Taylor Hall long term. I know he made a couple of ill-advised defensive zone passes, Bridgette, but I just like, I mean, at the same time, he had how many big goals for the team, and if he doesn't score those, maybe they aren't in positions to win games that they ended up choking away. And I just like his overall. He has some work to do defensively, sure, that's definite, but I just like his overall persona and his approach to the game. So long term, I really want them to sign him. To your question about is trading Ullmark or somebody else to relieve more salary cap necessary, I absolutely think so. And I said this last week when we spoke. I think that the goaltending position is vital, but I don't think that you need to have two number one goalies. I think you can, like, outside of Andrei Vasilevsky in the last 5 years, I mean, you look at the last 20 Stanley Cup champions, and maybe 15-20% of the time it was like a top elite goalie that hoisted the Stanley Cup for their winning team. Most of the time it's just somebody kind of random. They're a flash in the pan here, or they had a couple strong years. So I just think the goaltending position is very important, but I don't think it's essential to have Ullmark and Swayman. So and I think there's other trades that can happen too. And I'm open to anything after last year. I don't want to. I know Scott's point about I'm not gonna overlook a historic 82 game season that the Bruins had last year. I'm with you on that. I'm just saying, like, if the Bruins feel change is needed, I support them. I don't have any like when shit like that happens, like they did in the postseason, you have to be willing to accept anything. And I guess I'm just willing to accept anything that they do. Hopefully, it's everything that they do is for the best.
Yeah, and on Ullmark, like what you're talking about, I feel like that's also, I mentioned this on the last podcast, but that could also potentially lead to his market being a bit depressed. Like if other teams kind of have that same attitude of like, hey, look at the kind of goalies that have won Stanley Cups. Why would we trade a first round pick for Linus Ullmark when we can just, throw a few different pretty good goalies at it and hope one of them gets hot? Like there's obviously risk in that approach, but after seeing Vegas with Adin Hill win the cup, I could see teams kind of adopting that attitude, which wouldn't help the Bruins market. And the situation I could see where they hang on to both goalies is just that the right deal isn't out there. And I'm not just giving Linus Ullmark away. Like if they traded Ullmark in the same kind of trade that they just made with Taylor Hall, where it's like, all right, you're just dumping salary and, hey, we'll take 2 fringe NHLers that may or may not ever play for us. I would not like that. Like you can't do that with Linus Ullmark. He has more value. So like he's got to get you, if not the first round, like at least into the second and possibly something else along with that, or a much better prospect, or, part of a hockey trade where maybe you're targeting a center. Like there's got to be something real coming back in return for Linus Ullmark for me. So if that deal's out there, then yeah, I'm absolutely still open to trading him, because I do think with this team right now, I think that money would be better spent on other positions, loading up elsewhere and going a little cheaper at goalie. But if the right trade isn't out there, then, ultimately I would be okay with hanging on to him and, reevaluating. Maybe you move a goalie at the trade deadline. Maybe you revisit next off season. But look, having this great goalie tandem was a huge part of their success in the regular season last year. So at the very least, it would help you win games in the regular season and get back to the playoffs, be in that position, and see where you're at. So they had to dump someone's salary. Taylor Hall is a huge chunk taken out that helps a lot. More is still needed, but it does allow you, if you're looking at Linus Ullmark's market, you now have at least a little leverage where you can say, well, we're just going to hang on to him. Like you don't need to have teams waiting you out and offering you crap in return. The Bruins now are at least at a spot where they could walk away from the table and just say, no, if you're not going to give us something good, then we're not trading him. Like, see ya.
Yeah, I do think it ties in a lot with the center conversation, right? If you do move him and you see, if the Bruins do move him and you see that it's in some sort of a deal with a center, even though they haven't announced Bergeron or Krejci's decision yet, it points in a certain direction. Like if you see the Bruins go out and trade Ullmark in a package to bring someone like Pierre-Luc Dubois, we talked about it a few episodes ago, a few centers that the Bruins could target, especially we're talking like a number 1 or number 2 center. If they're targeting someone like that, and kind of feel like you would know your answer on where Bergeron and Krejci stand. Even though as of right now it hasn't been announced, we know that they were planning on informing the team a few weeks, a month after the season. So I think they've already made that decision. They've let Sweeney know before he can make these moves, what their team looks like. They're not going to leave him out without that information and make it harder for him to just predict the future. So he already knows what's going on. I don't think the Taylor Hall move really shows any indication of that Bergeron Krejci front of things. But if Ullmark were to be moved for a center, that would really kind of show us where things might be at organizationally, because if you just lose Krejci, you probably can just replace him with Zacha. But if you are going to lose Bergeron, that would mean a bigger move would be necessary for a competitive non-rebuilding or non-bridge season.
Yeah, I think as far as Ullmark goes, of course, it's a different situation than Taylor Hall. Like you're not trading him away for nothing, for straight salary cap relief, because that's irresponsible when he's literally the reigning Vezina Trophy winner. And to your point, Scott, about how other teams may adopt the Vegas style and that might hinder the Bruins' ability to market Ullmark properly. I agree, though this could be still a unicorn example because he is the Vezina Trophy winner officially as of last night. And I still think that there are a lot of teams that do not have a sure thing in goal. And you can look at a reigning Vezina Trophy winner and say to yourself, okay, if we put him in net and we want to make the playoffs, the problem won't be in goal anymore. And so hopefully that is one asterisk to maybe teams being like recognizing what we might recognize, and that you can probably get away with. You definitely need good goaltending when it matters most, but do you need an elite guy on the books? Maybe not. But hopefully that'll entice teams. But yeah, as far as like, yeah, if they were to trade him for a center, yeah, maybe that would be indicative, Bridgette. I don't. It's one of those situations where they'll still probably try to find any return that they can get for him, and I don't think they're gonna want to try to sell low. I just don't know if there's a perfect match made in heaven where it's going to be a goalie for center swap, just because if you're trading for number one goalie, but you're shipping out a number one caliber center, it's like what direction's your team kind of going in? That's kind of those are two very important pieces to just kind of, they don't really cancel each other out. It's like you're getting rid of one need to acquire another.
Well, the only answer would be like cultural change. Like it would be best for both teams to kind of move on from each other. Like the center that as let the team know he doesn't want to be there anymore. Maybe one of those situations which we mentioned. Pierre-Luc Dubois might be in that kind of a situation. There's certain centers out there that kind of want to be out the door on the teams and are looking for a change. So if you can get something in return for them, then you may as well go for a guy like a sure thing in net if that's what you're also looking for. So
yeah, I feel like realistically for the Bruins, if they were to move Ullmark, maybe it's tough to really kind of gauge the market, but hopefully they could trade up or trade him and potentially get back into the first round this year. It's a deep draft. That would be ideal. I think if you're, let's be honest, guys, Linus Ullmark up until this past season was just kind of a guy. Like he was good for Boston. He was good in Buffalo on a bad team. But if you can trade him away and alleviate yourself from $5 million of his cap space, and then also hop into the first round this year, depending on what team you're dealing with. Like for Linus Ullmark, like I think if we said that this time last year, we'd be like, oh hell yeah, like absolutely, Linus Ullmark worth a first round pick when it's what you need because you don't have any of those. So I don't even need them to do bring an NHL caliber player back. I mean, if you were to get a first round pick and maybe like a fringe roster player, like whatever. I'm just saying. But I do have a question. If you guys like, there have been some rumblings, and this summer on Twitter and social media, I have literally just this offseason, I've just buried my head in the sand. Everybody and their mother is an insider with scoops and rumors.
The guy in the south or the guy in the north end at the Italian restaurant who says he overhears the conversations going on between Pastrnak and
yeah, and it's so much more of a mess now thanks to Elon Musk. Like now that blue check marks like don't mean anything. It's like there's people just like impersonating reporters they're saying like they work for a media organization or a podcast and they don't. And it's like it's such a mess. Like it's there's like the handful of people, maybe a dozen or so that like I actually trust and like wait to see if they say something, and then
Elliot Friedman.
Yeah, and then like the rest of it is like I'm just assuming there's nothing to it, and like until or unless one of these people are like proven correct on something.
Well, the last couple of like trade deadlines, I've just driven myself crazy with like seeing all these different rumors out there, and this guy's attached to this team, and blah blah blah, and I always get like, oh, like that would be sick to see him on the Bruins or whatever, and then it just never happens or whatever. So I've adopted this new philosophy where unless something's official, I just don't even put much thought into it. That said, because we are a podcast and we want some talking points, do you guys feel like Bergeron is? Do you guys feel like Bergeron is retiring? Because people were kind of whispering that the Bruins might have some burning desire to replace that and maybe make some franchise altering moves. Take it for what it's worth. But I'm just going to ask you guys a question. Do you feel like Bergeron might be done?
He definitely could be. I mean, I know it's like a weak response, but I still feel like I'm at like 50-50. I do think he's probably let Don Sweeney know by now. So you got to assume that like whatever approach Sweeney's taking is with his decision in mind, one way or the other. Bergeron and his wife also have their fourth kid on the way in like literally any day now. And I would think that Bergeron would have made his decision before that because, once a baby comes along, like he's just going to want to be focused on that. He's not going to still want to be debating his decision on his future at the same time, I wouldn't think. So
Scott knows from his experience of having so many kids.
Got 0 kids that I know of.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I mean, I guess like if Sweeney is looking for, you know, a huge franchise altering move for a center, like if there's any truth to that, then sure, that could be an indication. But I would say like got to be a little careful because the Bruins could also trade for a center this offseason, whether that's, you know, Scheifele or Elias Lindholm or someone else we're not really thinking. Like Pierre-Luc Dubois kind of seems like he's going to the Kings. It seems like that's pretty close to getting done. You know, I guess things could change or could fall apart or whatever. You know, the Bruins could trade for a center with Bergeron still returning because you pretty easily just bump Pavel Zacha back to the wing again for another year. So, you know, I think the Bruins know that they need another center at some point. And so, like, they could, even if Bergeron's come back, they could be looking at getting out a year ahead of that if the right deal's out there to be made. So, I don't, you know, to me, like, it's not, even if they trade for a center, it's not a definitive sign that Bergeron's gone, although it certainly would lend some credence to that. But, you know, like I could see Zacha playing wing, especially if they now don't sign Bertuzzi. Like we all think that trading Taylor Hall means, you know, Bertuzzi gets signed next, but that's going to come in the next few days because I think if Bertuzzi gets to the open market on July 1st on Saturday, he's one of the top free agent forwards available. And I think he's going to have a lot of offers, a lot of interest, and potentially get priced out of the Bruins range. So, you know, I don't think it's a total lock that like Bertuzzi's 100% back. I think the Bruins want to make that happen, and there's a lot of interest in doing that, and they will try to do so before the end of this week. But if that didn't happen, then like if they're still looking for a center, you can bump Zacha back over to left wing, and now you still have, you know, a really solid top 6.
Yeah, I mean, to answer the original question about Bergeron coming back, I feel like he wants to come back, but maybe logistically some life decisions are, you know, impacting what's going on. I would be kind of surprised if Krejci comes back. Scott, you're right about the Zacha thing. Like, he's versatile. You could play him wherever. It'd be good to get a center either way, obviously, if you can, but we're probably not talking about a number one, like a really big move center in that situation, just because of the cap. Though, as we mentioned before, Bergeron has been willing to take a really team-friendly deal, so he gives you a little bit of extra flexibility in that category. Well,
and not to interrupt, but specifically on like the two guys I mentioned, Scheifele and Lindholm, they're on pretty affordable deals for this season, and then they would need extensions, but the cap's going to go up, and the Bruins will have a lot more cap space next year. So, like that could still work even for a cap strap team.
Yeah, and the other thing that I want to point out is that we're on like a very condensed timeline here because free agency, like you mentioned, and you know, we only have a few days left where some of these moves can be made before no trade clauses change and different things like that, and before people reach the open market and before the draft. So if you're looking to make moves that involve picks, you know, that's coming up really close. So this was, you know, we weren't necessarily expecting the Taylor Hall news when it happened yesterday, but it feels like there's at least going to be one other shoe to drop before the draft or before the weekend. It would make sense if the timeline for that. So we could be on, I really hope this doesn't happen, but we've recorded before and then had to come back to the drawing board and be like, oh, and also this person's gone now. Like when they fired Bruce Cassidy, we had just recorded, but hopefully they spread this out a little bit for us. But yeah, just to reiterate that the timeline, there's not a lot of time to get some of this done. So these things could be happening this week.
Yeah, and as I kind of kicked off the speculation with how everybody seems to be an insider these days, one person who I do put stock in what they report in particular as it pertains to the Bruins is John Buccigross, and he kind of, mentioned that he's hearing things that the Bruins are trying to, maybe do some big things. And so that was the one that kind of stood out to me amongst the others. I don't know. I know we've had him on the podcast before, and I think we all feel that he's a very credible source, especially as it has to do with college hockey and his roots to this Boston area. So is that what made you guys perk up a little bit too when he started to add on to that?
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting because like the account that he quote tweeted was just a total BS account. Like that account went on to like tweet something after that was like clearly just not even remotely true. But if Butchergrass is tweeting that, like I'm assuming he was hearing something. I wonder if it was the Taylor Hall thing or something bigger. Like, because I guess that's kind of. I feel like different people have different ideas of like what qualifies as big at this point. Because like we've talked about trading Taylor Hall so much that didn't really feel that big to me. Like I understand it is because Taylor Hall is a big name and $6 million is a pretty big contract. But it was like almost expected. Like, I don't think anyone was really shocked. But does Butchergrass look at that and consider that big? Like that, I just don't know. So, like it would have, if he's tweeting something like that, it feels to me like that's something bigger than just dumping Taylor Hall's contract. But maybe not. Like maybe that's exactly what he was hearing. And, now it's happened. So, one thing I do think is I'm confident that like Don Sweeney is calling everyone and like exploring all different kinds of options. I think that's clear. Like every insider, you hear from whatever podcasts or shows they're on, they say like he's been one of the most active GMs. Like he's been all over the phone lines. And that makes a lot of sense because they're a team that has to do a lot and has to see, what the market is for players that he's potentially going to trade away, who's available for players he wants to target, like all that. So yeah, that requires a lot of legwork to make all those phone calls and kind of get a feel for just for what the market is, like just what you might be able to get for your own guys, what you might have to give up for other players, whether it is a center or a defenseman or a wing, because again, they still only have 6 forwards under contract. So rounding out that lineup has to come from somewhere. And I don't think it's going to be all AHL rookies. Like I think there's going to be a couple forwards brought in, whether it's through trade or free agency somehow. So, or guys that they're re-signing. Obviously, we think they're going to re-sign Trent Frederick. Tyler Bertuzzi seems like a priority. We've heard there's mutual interest in Garnet Hathaway re-signing, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I think it makes sense that like there's a lot of rumors around the Bruins because I think when you're making that many phone calls and talking to that many different GMs, yeah, some of it leaks and gets out there and people start thinking, oh, wow, they're talking to that team? Like, who could they be targeting? And like all that starts going. And that's how you end up with, everyone kind of tweeting like, I'm hearing the Bruins are doing something big. And it's like, well, yeah, of course, because they're talking to everyone. So
yeah, that's true. I guess if you tweet that right before free agency starts, then you're probably going to nail it. Like just because, yeah, it's pretty clear they needed to do a few big things. Taylor Hall is a big name, and I liked him in his time in Boston. So, and clearly they did too when they signed the extension. So it is big in that way. He's not in your top 6 though. They had hoped he would be in their top 6 when they first got him, I think, and was for at different times, but didn't end up there most of the last season. I don't want to keep speculating, but it seems like, well, and also another thing that Don Sweeney has to do with his calls is if he knows who's not coming back from his free agents, he's going to be trying to fill those holes. So, like if he knows Clifton's gone or, name X free agent, because there's so many, he's going to be having to try to figure out, especially on D, if there's not very many internal solutions. Orlov as well. I've heard Jones talk about it in particular a lot, that they should prioritize bringing back Orlov as well as Bertuzzi, but I just feel like that's not as realistic because to have the space for both of them would be pretty difficult. It seems like unless one of these other big moves were to happen.
I can't wait to tweet out hours before the draft, hearing a lot of prospects on the move today.
Okay, good. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, Orlov, I like Orlov. I'm not prioritizing him over Bertuzzi. I mean, you have on the left side right now, as it stands today, I mean, you have Lindholm, you have Grzelcyk, you have Lori in the system. And I don't know. I don't love the term that Orlov would get. I also just don't feel like he's a luxury right now. I feel like Bertuzzi's he's a necessity. I feel like Orlov would be a luxury. So
yeah, and Orlov mentioned in his getaway day, whatever, what was it called? Breakup day interview that this is probably going to be his last big contract. So that means it's very important for him to try to set himself up to get as much money as he can, because this could be the last big one that he gets. So it seemed like that's what where his head was at when he was talking about becoming a free agent.
Yeah. And also like trading Taylor Hall for that cap relief, it's easy to draw conclusions that it's for money to afford Tyler Bertuzzi, but it's like, yeah, but Patrice Bergeron isn't coming back for free. I mean, even if he's coming back for something small, like there's a lot that they have to move around just to bring back a couple of pieces that we still take for granted, like Patrice Bergeron. Like right now we kind of talk like, is Bergeron coming back? Yes or no? It's like, okay, if the answer is yes, for how much? Now he'll probably take a discount, obviously, but they still got to find that room. The Taylor Hall was like, it was very, very necessary to move that salary cap for, the prospect of Bertuzzi, but also for other things. And that's why, like on the back end, honestly, unless you're Charlie McAvoy or David Pastrnak, I have a hard time saying that anybody is untouchable on this team. And if there's a deal to be made and maybe you're just more or less relieving salary, I don't know. The Bruins don't really have much of an option. Like they don't have much of an option. So yeah, I don't know. It's
Scott,
it's a lot they got to figure out here.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the Taylor Hall contract being off the books, does that bring them up to $10 million of cap space at this point?
Yeah, they're just under 11 million.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the number that they'll be working with here.
Yeah, I mean, I like Orlov too, and I think he was a really good fit, and I think he brings a lot of like what they've been looking for to reinforce that left side. But yeah, there would have to be multiple other moves to make to be able to get there. Like then you probably are talking about trading away Linus Ullmark to free up a chunk of money. And, you're probably making hopefully a hockey trade to move Matt Grzelcyk, whether that's for picks, prospects, whatever. And then you're probably buying out Mike Riley, which I think, may very well happen no matter what. But yeah, because then you could see a left side of Lindholm, Orlov, forward. And it's like, all right, that looks pretty good. Like now you've got a really good decor that you feel good about again. Otherwise you're probably putting Matt Grzelcyk back in the top four, which, as we know, regular season, he does very well there, whether he's playing with McAvoy or Carlo, that works. And then playoffs, he struggles or he's hurt or the Bruins don't trust him and he's a healthy scratch or whatever. So, it's Grzelcyk in particular is just such like an interesting one to me this offseason because you do feel like they have to decide exactly what they think of him. Like, do you trust him to go back into the top four and be a regular for you? Because if you do, then you hang on to him, and that's how you round out your decor, and then you basically have one spot up for grabs if Clifton leaves. But if you're going to be in the same spot every year where you're constantly looking to upgrade from him at the trade deadline, and you don't really trust him in the playoffs, and it's like, well, then you might as well trade him. Like, what's the point of hanging on to him if that's how you feel about him and he's making, $3.8 million? Like, so yeah, I could see them trying to add on the left side of the defense especially if they do trade away Grzelcyk. But does all that come together and happen in time to sign Orlov, who, like Bertuzzi up front, would be one of the top defensemen on the market, and you would have to assume would have some pretty good offers right off the bat and potentially sign, right over the weekend. Like, again, time's ticking with all these guys. So if the Bruins at all have any plans of trying to sign Orlov, then the moves to free up that money have to happen soon. Although I will note, you can go 10% over the cap during the off season. People may or may not know this. So, like, for now, you have an extra $8 million to work with, but obviously at some point, other teams are going to realize you're over the cap, and then that makes it even harder to shed salary because teams know you have to do it to get to opening nights. So that becomes a little tougher to move contracts out at that point.
So do we have a breaking news sounder alarm yet for the skate pod? No?
I'll work on it.
Okay.
I'll work on it.
So basically, I'll just say this: the Bruins have a new logo. They have a new crest for their centennial season. It's more or less the Cam Neely, Ray Bourque, Terry O'Reilly era Bruins, and this has been speculated for, honestly, dating back to last season. I remember Pete Blackburn was talking about this with us on the podcast, and but yeah, the Bruins are pretty much going. It looks like they're going to go back to the 70s, 80s uniforms for the centennial season, and likely probably after that as well, which is, we don't know what the roster is going to be next year, but they'll be the best looking team on ice. That's for sure, because those uniforms are the best that they've had in the franchise, in my opinion. And I would put them up against any in the league, past or present.
Yeah.
So Brian, was that like the sounder for the emergency fashion segment that you just started?
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, I think I think there's a lot of listeners for us, and not everybody cares about uniforms, but our listenership ranges from probably younger kids to people in their 60s, 70s who have watched the Bruins over eras, and I think they probably think that's pretty cool. So
yeah, I'll be interested to see what the jerseys look like. This crest, like, I watched the video just before we started recording, and it seems like the idea is it's like combining kind of all their different crests, like little elements of like each era, whether that's a color or even just like the way the like the outline of it is or whatever. So it's not the exact same as like any previous era, but Brian's right, it does look like that kind of 70s 80s crest, with a little more yellow than like today's has. So it'll be interesting to see, like, if are there going to be new jersey? Obviously the jersey is going to look different if this crest is on them, but is there like a whole new jersey design to go along with it, and what does that end up looking like? So but yeah, I mean, hard to go wrong with really any version of the spoked B, but I do like that kind of look with more yellow in it. It's
also possible that the yellow logo is for the black jersey, and that the white jersey might have black on the perimeter. So that's back, and that's what the Bruins used to do. They literally had a different logo for home and away. Currently it's the same for both jerseys, but yeah. But anyway,
we've already been blessed with Meth Bear this past season. So
and Meth Bear would be on the shoulder of these, I think, because to give him another tip of the cap, but so Pete Blackburn tweeted back-to-back baseball caps with this and he also somebody designed Luke, I don't know, Woshness. I don't know how to say his last name, but he designed these jerseys, and I think where there's smoke, there's fire. And I think basically, I think it's more or less going to be the Neely Bourque era type jerseys, which I think it's my favorite Bruins uniforms ever. So, sorry about the big noise there. But anyway, so now we can go back to discussing what the players in those uniforms would potentially be next year. And I'll just go back quickly to the Bergeron thing. Up until recently, I kind of assumed that we were just talking about the centennial season. I do think it's important for him to be part of that season. I think he wants to be part of that season. I think he also wants to help the Bruins transition from him to whoever the next center would be. I don't think he wants to just kind of like leave him in the dust. Even if he gives him a couple months to figure it out, like he knows a couple months in the summertime is tough to replace Bergeron or even come close to that. But what I didn't know, Scott, was that he's expecting his 4th child soon. And, that's real life stuff right there. And to be on the road for 41 games a year, when you already have 3 kids at home, plus the newborn, it's a lot to put on your wife. And so that's a wrinkle that I wasn't aware of.
They're there a lot. I see his kids are there all the time, running
Okay.
around the locker room playing with a touchscreen.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what his decision is going to be. I do agree with you guys that whatever his decision is, I do believe the Bruins are aware of it. And I guess we'll find some context clues coming up here, what that answer might be.
Also, sorry, go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was going to say, like, by the way, we should mention that the NHL Awards were Monday night, and Bergeron won his 6th Selke Trophy, 2nd in a row. He now has 2 more than anyone else in history, and obviously, like, totally deserved. He got 187 of 196 first place votes, and it does feel, it's like, I know there was a slight dip in 5-on-5 offense. Like, if you wanted to nitpick and try to find an area where there was maybe a tiny bit of drop off, like that's where you'd go. But the all around game is still so good. Like, it's not a lot of athletes walk away when they're still one of the best in the game. Like, that's hard to do, because generally once you do that, like, you're not coming back after a year away. You're not getting it back. So, man, like, I don't know. Like, I feel like it'd be really hard for him to walk away still being that good, still being, arguably the best 200-foot center in the game. Like, he's obviously still has a lot to offer. And even like we talk about, it'd be nice if they could, cut his minutes a little more. Maybe it's more of a second line role, but it's like, realistically though, like, he was absolutely still good enough to be a first line center last year. Like that, there's still, his game is obviously still good enough to really make an impact and help the team win. And obviously it's unfortunate that, he suffered the injury at the very end of the season and we didn't get to see him be healthy in the playoffs, but he didn't need surgery. So that's not a factor. Like, other than welcoming a newborn which throws a wrench into any off season, like, he can have a relatively normal off season and do all his regular workouts and practices and skating and all that. So I don't know. I mean, if he's walking away, it's definitely with something still in the tank. Like, it's not like he ran until the tires fell off.
Yeah, that's what kind of blows my mind with the talk radio narrative that Bergeron's washed up. It's like, well, he just won another Selke, guys. Like, he had an injury in the playoffs that tainted so many people's thought of where he was this season. And also that injury, I believe we've read through, what the treatment for it is. It's not super serious. It's not hard to fix that injury. It's not like he needed surgery. And by the way, he did play in the playoffs. It wasn't keeping him from playing hockey. Was it keeping him from being 100%? Yes. But like, this wasn't something that is as concerning as I think people look at it and see, and they look at his age. But look, we've mentioned this before. He played almost an entire season. He still good enough to win another Selke. He's not washed up, and he's going to help you with this huge cap struggle that you're having. And by the way, all the awards that the Bruins won last night, Bergeron gets the Selke. Pasternak's the only one who doesn't win, but he's going against McDavid, so he's a close second. Or he was maybe a distant second. I don't know. He was second.
He got the only first place vote that didn't go to McDavid. So I can't wait. I hope we find out who this writer was at some point. But someone had McDavid 5th.
No,
that is absolutely insane.
Oh God, that guy's gonna lose his rights, or he or she is losing their vote. But so Bergeron wins the Selke, Montgomery wins the Jack Adams, Vezina for Ullmark, Pastrnak and Ullmark both got first team NHL All-Stars. Lindholm was on second team NHL All-Stars. So that's
Lindholm
another.
finished. Yeah, Lindholm finished fourth in Norris voting and wasn't that far behind Cale Makar for third.
Yeah, and that's the thing. All of this I'm saying to put in perspective how good a team they had last year, that you're not going to be able to keep a good chunk of them. You see them going out and getting these awards, and yet there's still, controversy over whether Bergeron, you should bring him back or not. I think most people understand the reasons why it would make a lot of sense if you could get him to agree to it. But if you think about all the money that they're having to free up right now to keep the exact same team that they could have had last year, it's just ridiculous how much talent and how much value that team had. And it's not going to be the same this year.
So when you guys were watching the awards last night, Jim Montgomery winning the Jack Adams Trophy was well deserved based on last year's regular season, and his story is very inspiring and admirable. And regardless of playoff shortcomings, I mean, everybody. I mean, I've said this before in the podcast. Like, I very seldom will hold the coach responsible for the actions of players. Like, players play the game. Coaches, you can draw up the X's and O's, you can inspire, but there's only so much you can do when the puck drops and the game is played between the boards and the coach is standing on the bench. So I know Jim Montgomery had some questionable playoff decisions, but I don't really look at. I really don't. I fault the players first and foremost. So when I watch him win the Jack Adams, I felt great for him. There was no coulda, shoulda, wouldas in my mind because I just was really happy for him. The coulda, shoulda, wouldas in my mind come in when I just see all the Bruins nominated, like Pastrnak, all the players nominated, Pastrnak, Ullmark, Pastrnak twice, Ullmark, Bergeron. So when you guys are watching those awards and you just think back about how the Bruins are just, up for everything essentially, and they pan to the audience and you're seeing the Bruins players surrounded by other players who played for 6 to 8 more weeks more than they did. Like,
yeah, Kachuk.
Did you guys get those? Yeah, like, did you guys? Well, that was an obvious one, right? Like, you have the split screen of McDavid, Pastrnak, and Kachuk, and it's like, well, McDavid was over in the Western Conference, but Kachuk versus Pastrnak, like, Kachuk won that battle, and Pasta like had a decent series, and wasn't the reason that the Bruins lost, wasn't the reason that they won ultimately. Kachuk was one of the reasons that Florida did win. But long-winded way of saying, like, how did you guys feel watching that award show? Was it just another kind of kick in the gut, like, let's just move on from this season,
Yeah, I was kind of. So it did seem like the guys who won, certainly they gave, like, they seem to appreciate winning, and I hope, like, as time goes on, like, they can appreciate it more, and I hope fans can as well, because yeah, we all know, like, none of those mean a whole lot compared to a Stanley Cup. Obviously, the Stanley Cup matters 1,000 times more and is the only real goal at the end of the day. But those awards do mean something, and like those guys should be proud to win them. Bergeron having that many Selkies and winning another in runaway fashion at age 37 is insane. Like, that is like a remarkable accomplishment. Ullmark, having a losing record before coming to Boston, and then growing into a goalie who wins the Triple Crown, one of only 2 in the last 30 years to do that, tying the franchise record for wins, and then winning a Vezina. Like, that's a remarkable accomplishment. Like, he should be really proud of that. Jim Montgomery is a great story, having his coaching career temporarily derailed by alcohol addiction, which obviously he has talked about before and talked about in his speech, and now coming back and winning the Jack Adams in his first season and setting regular season wins and points records. Like, yeah, like that's a great story. So I do think, like, those awards should deserve to be celebrated and recognized and appreciated. But I also understand, like, especially for fans, it's really difficult to do that right now because all you care about is that they lost in the first round and your attention is on, what they're going to do this offseason and who's even going to be back. And is it the end of an era? Does Bergeron retire? Like, yeah, obviously fans are worried about a lot more than awards. So I get that, no one was really throwing like an NHL awards party and celebrating last night. But, I feel like I'm glad for I'm happy for those guys winning. But also understand like why some fans don't really care or aren't exactly in a mood to celebrate those wins.
Yeah, it was incredibly well deserved, every single one of those. So, however, I was talking to Arkan yesterday and he was like, this just makes me sad. Like, this just makes it worse, like salt in the wound that and I was saying, I was like, I had canceled all my plans for June just in case there was a duck boat parade that we were going to be going to. Like, I had made sure not to plan anything in June for Celtics, Bruins. Everything was looking great. Then we got the cursed baseball hat, and Celtics obviously made it much further, but it was such a very hopeful end of April and like into May that never saw it coming that there would be such a stark contrast between the accolades that the players are getting and deserve and the difference in what the actual end result was for the team. It shows you just how much they should have been able to go further. It is what it is. I think Bruins fans, I mean, obviously if you're a big Bruins fan, you're still happy for the guys. But it does feel, it just does kind of feel like salt in the wounds a little bit to watch it and just see how many guys on your team that you follow were right there among the best, but couldn't put it together.
Yeah, I mean, I never would have watched that award show and felt salt in the wounds had they lost in the conference finals or even the Stanley Cup finals. Like, you can at least sit there and say, like, they gave it their best. Only one team can win every year, despite what the regular season record was. That said, the first round exit to me was unacceptable because they literally fell to every cliche that was warned about being that team. Like, they were everything that everybody warned about being that President's Trophy historic team. They lived up to that. And that's what annoys me the most about this team. Yes, they were that team that fell in the first round to an 8 seed. They were that team that choked a 3-1 series lead away. Like, they were all those things. They were that team that looked nothing like they did in the regular season. So that's what annoys me about the postseason. Not that they didn't win a Stanley Cup. The Stanley Cup is the hardest trophy in sports to win. One team can win it despite how you finish the regular season. But let's be honest, they fell very, very short of anything acceptable based off of what they did in the regular season. So that's what pisses me off about how things ended. Yeah, but regular season awards are what they are. Like, you can't take anything away from what they did in the regular season, regardless of the outcome in the playoffs.
Yeah, and
It's just a reminder of, yeah, this is how good you guys were, and this is how you didn't play when it mattered most.
That when the guys got there too, it was bittersweet. It's one thing to win the Vezina if you just won Stanley Cup and you're like on top of the world. That's an on top of the world feeling. Instead, it's a bittersweet feeling for yourself, I'm sure, being there and accepting the award and giving the speech about, thank you so much to my teammates and whatnot, and just knowing that you didn't. It's a different feeling to go there after you won a Stanley Cup and put it all out there.
They definitely could feel like they definitely felt like that kid in high school that's walking around the halls and knows everybody's talking about them, like whispering about them behind their backs, like gossiping about them. It's like they felt like that. I mean, you walk into an award show and like the whole hockey world, like, watch what happened. Like, it's just everybody knows. Everybody there in that room knew how much the Bruins failed to come close to their goal. Like, it was. I mean, that's.
I don't think I'll ever forget what that room was like after that Game 7 overtime loss. Like, that was miserable. That was a miserable room. And just stunned.
I will say, I think at the award show, I think the Bruins were lucky that so the NHL Awards, I love watching them just for how awkward and unintentionally funny they always are. It's like it's so uncomfortable at times, but the NHL in the past has had like some comedians host who will, really dig into people, and the Bruins are probably glad that like there wasn't a comedian who was gonna, reel off like 5 jokes at their expense.
Yeah, it's country
Dirk,
singers.
yeah, Dirk Spenley was the host, and he like kind of made one at one point, but it was very half-hearted and like not even a good joke. So
That Dirks, he's just too nice.
yeah. So like I think they were spared like real humiliation or just like constantly being mocked throughout the night, which you could see like I don't know, say you put that in Toronto and there's some sort of comedian who's like a Maple Leafs fan or something, like you could have seen that being a much more uncomfortable night for them.
Yeah, but then you're gonna have to turn those jokes back on yourself because you Maple Leafed again. So like,
yeah, right.
It's coming back at you.
But yeah, so it just it feels like a subdued night. Like it's just you recognize that yeah, those are all nice accomplishments and you're happy for those guys, but like I said, like it's just a reminder of how good they were and how short they ultimately came up.
Yeah, and then Scott, you gotta go soon because you're going on. Are you going on with Jones and Mego or Gresham Fourier?
Gresham Fourier. So
okay.
People,
and Scott,
if
Scott
people haven't heard enough
last
of me,
night
they can find that on demand after they listen to this.
Yeah. Scott was on last night with Fitzy and Hart, and I had a chance to put Scotty Popcorn's picture on the screen when I was running the Twitch. The commercial break was just a picture of Scott eating popcorn, and then the next one was just Scott as popcorn. So he was
Popcorn.
happy. Yeah, Scotty Popcorn. Anyway, any final thoughts, guys, on Hall and Foligno, who we didn't talk about really much at all, but these were two guys that I enjoyed talking to throughout the season that always gave really nice answers. Mature, very, very mature. Obviously, Foligno being a former captain, but Taylor Hall had a lot of emotional maturity, and sometimes I feel like even answered questions that he maybe gave us more details than the team would have liked him to give, which is great for us. I thought both of those guys were actually pretty stand-up guys. So I want to say that before we finish up on them leaving town.
Yeah, and I think that'll be good for Chicago to have those guys. Good for Foligno getting $4 million. I don't think anyone else was gonna give him that, but Chicago's a team with oodles of cap space that actually had to get up to the cap floor. Never mind being anywhere near the ceiling. So they can do that for 1 year, and he'll be a good leader. That's obviously Chicago's drafting Connor Bedard first overall. So I know people are like, why would they even want to, bring in veterans? Like, aren't they rebuilding? And it's like, well, because you want to bring Connor Bedard into like a good culture. Like you want him to have guys to learn from in terms of how to be a pro and what it takes and start to build something there and like not, so like Foligno helps with that. Obviously a former captain himself. Taylor Hall, I think, helps with that. Like, I think he was a good locker room fit here. I think he has definitely matured. The Taylor Hall that we saw in Boston was definitely mature. I know you hear stories about him when he was younger, but
yeah, he's 30 now.
Yeah.
And I would say both of those two guys were two of the most accountable guys, even like in the media, the way that they answered questions, they held themselves accountable. And those are, qualities you'd want around a young guy like Bedard.
Yeah. And Taylor Hall will probably play on Bedard's wing, which again, like you want him to have good wings when he steps into the NHL. You don't want him playing with two bums. And it's like, all right, go figure it out, Connor. You're going to carry us. So, good move from the Blackhawks end. And I think, Foligno and Hall, obviously they would rather be competing for a Stanley Cup. Neither one of them has ever won one, but I think they'll be professionals and they'll embrace, a new role in a new place in Chicago.
Would you say that then this was a trade that was a win for both sides? I feel like both sides got what they wanted and made themselves. I wouldn't say the Bruins made themselves better by getting rid of Hall, but they put themselves because of the situation they were in, they're able to kind of get what they wanted out of it.
Well, now that I think about it, the Bruins traded away Foligno's UFA rights. When you're an unrestricted free agent, what rights do the Bruins have to that player? Just like they can discuss with him prior to other teams? Is that what it is?
Yeah, that it was just negotiating before July 1st.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. So I think like Taylor Hall, well, first of all, Connor Bedard can come in and he can turn Chicago. If he's as good as his stats say he is, and he's this McDavid Crosby type prospect, like, he could turn Chicago from basement dwellers into a bubble team in a year. And next thing you know, maybe people want to go there again because he's there. And Chicago struck oil with like landing him. It's so whatever. And Taylor Hall can absolutely benefit from that. Like, Taylor Hall is more of a long-term probably fixture in Chicago. Like, they'll probably maybe try to resign him another couple of years or whatever. And maybe he's going to hop up to like 80 points playing with Bedard. Nick Foligno, he's an interesting one. Like, Chicago needs a captain. Jonathan Taves is retired. His leadership is out of the room, and maybe they slap a C on Nick Foligno for a couple of years and try to really and do. That's probably that could be why they're giving him $4 million to come in. And Nick, we need this culture established for the long haul, and we need you to come in for 2-3 years and be our captain here, and until they give Bedard the C at 22, right? So, good for both guys. I thought they were good Bruins. Taylor Hall gets a bad rap in local media pundits, but like, he had nothing to do with the Bruins not getting past the first round. In fact, he had, Bridgette, you mentioned it earlier, he had a good first round series. He took his role in the third line without hesitation. And Nick Foligno had a really strong bounce back year up until his injury, and then maybe playoffs. It was tough to kind of get back to full form. But a guy like Nick Foligno is a reason why I was so certain that this Bruins team wasn't going to flounder in the first round and be that first round casualty, because I just thought this Bruins team had everything. They had grit, they had skill, they had depth. So, but regardless, their time in Boston is done, and I enjoyed watching the two of them, and wish them nothing but the best for sure. Yeah. So yeah, Scott, you have a hard out in 5 minutes. So maybe any final comments from either of you guys before we wrap this up?
No, I think I'm good. I mean, we didn't really touch on the prospects they get back, but I guess I would say like their bodies, they might get a chance to compete for an NHL roster spot. More likely they're in Providence. And, we talked about it with Mark Diver, like how thin the Bruins are at defense, just in terms of like, who do they even call up? Like, who even gets a chance to compete for a roster spot? So the combination of Mitchell and Regula from Chicago, and then the trade for Riley Walsh from New Jersey, where all they gave up there was Shane Bowers, who they just got for Keith Kincaid last year. So I don't know, they're fringe NHLers. They're guys who can compete. Maybe they can get called up during the season. And who knows, maybe one of them becomes something. Regula's the youngest, so maybe it's him. But yeah, a couple of dart throws, and at the very least, some organizational depth that I think they needed on defense.
Is it worth reading into the fact that they're all right-handed D-men?
I mean, it's certainly, yeah, you can certainly look at that and be like, well, those are guys who are going to compete if Connor Clifton's gone, right? Like, that would make sense. I don't necessarily think it would like block them from re-signing Clifton if somehow there ends up being a deal that makes sense and they have the money. Because none of those guys are like locks for the NHL. So it's not like you're not leaving a spot open for them, but if there is a spot there, then you let them compete for it.
All right, Bridgette, any final thoughts for you?
No, we got to let Scotty go. He's a busy man this week.
Scotty's got to go. All right. All right. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you very soon. Hey guys, thanks for watching the Skate Podcast. If you want to see more of our videos, visit our playlist.
Not in front of a screen? You can listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Don't forget to follow us on social media. And if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel,